I didn't go into Coldroot Hollow looking for a ghost. I went because I needed an ending, the kind of ending you can put a period on. Something clean enough to publish. Something that doesn't keep you awake, replaying the same unanswered question until your brain starts making patterns out of static. The town was called Marrow Glen. It sat a few miles off the highway, the kind of place you pass without noticing unless you're already looking for it. 2 gas stations, 1 diner, a church with a white steeple that looked too bright against the trees. Past that, the road narrowed, the shoulders fell away, and the forest pressed closer. Not a scenic forest, not postcard pines and sunbeams. This was dense, wet, dark timber, everything leaning inward. Coldroot Hollow wasn't on most maps. Locals didn't advertise it. They didn't even like saying the name out loud. The diner waitress gave me my coffee, heard what I was asking, and quietly told me to stop. "People go in," she said, eyes on the counter like it might answer for her. "People don't come out right. Not don't come out. Not always." She said, "Don't come out right." I asked her what that meant. She finally looked at me then. Her eyes were tired, like they leave something there, like they forget they ever had it. I tried to laugh it off, but it came out thin. I'd heard variations of that line before in other places. Folklore always repeats itself. Different names, same shape. A warning wrapped in a story, because warnings alone don't stick. I was working on a series, regional folklore, modern retellings, the kind of thing people play in the background while they drive at night. My episodes did well when the fear felt close, real, a trail you could actually walk, a creek you could actually drown in. The audience didn't want monsters. They wanted the idea that something could happen to them if they took the wrong turn. Coldroot Hollow had everything a story like that needed. A missing person case from 11 years ago, an amateur botanist named Elise Marin, last seen hiking alone. A volunteer search that lasted 3 days. Dogs that refused to cross a certain line in the woods. A deputy's report that described unexplained disorientation among the search team, like the forest itself couldn't be held in the mind for long. And beneath that, older stories. The Briar Widow. A woman in the woods who kept her face hidden and her hands clean. A woman who didn't drag you into the dark. A woman who made you walk there yourself. I brought a moving background for the video because viewers liked something to stare at. Shadowed pines, slow drifting fog, a suggestion of depth. And I planned to narrate like I always did. Calm, controlled, respectful of silence. What I didn't plan for was how quickly the forest would begin to feel like it was listening. The first sign was the trailhead, not the marker. Not the old wooden sign that said Coldroot in peeled paint. The sign looked normal. Neglected, but normal. It was the notebook. A waterproof logbook in a metal box, like hikers. Leave at remote trailheads sometimes. I opened it expecting names, dates, maybe a joke or two. The pages were mostly blank, not empty. Blank, like the ink had been washed away, except for one line, pressed hard enough to score the paper. "Do not answer her." I stared at it longer than I should have, as if the words might change if I looked away. Then I shut the box. I told myself it was a prank. I told myself that was all folklore ever was. Someone else's fear, handed down until it fit your hands. And I stepped under the trees. The trail was narrower than I expected, and it didn't take long for the town noises to vanish behind me. That should have been comforting. Silence is what most people come to the woods for. But this silence wasn't peaceful. It felt deliberate, like sound had been removed, not absent. My boots sank into damp leaf litter. The air smelled like cold soil and old rain. Every few minutes, a drop of water fell from a branch and struck the hood of my jacket with a soft, hollow tap. I kept my pace steady. I narrated a few lines under my breath to test the acoustics, like a singer checking a room. My voice came back wrong, not echoed, not swallowed, just dulled, like the forest didn't want it carrying far. I stopped and listened. No birds, no insects, no distant traffic. Just that slow, occasional dripping and my own breath. I checked my phone. No service, which I'd expected. I checked my GPS anyway, out of habit. The arrow spun for a second, then settled, pointing down the trail. Normal. Still. I made a small note on my recorder. No wildlife sounds. Air pressure feels heavy. I walked another half-mile before I saw the first ribbon, a strip of pale cloth tied around a sapling at eye level. Not the bright plastic trail markers you see on public land. This looked like old cotton, frayed at the edges, stained faintly brown, as if it had been soaked and dried again. A second ribbon hung 20 feet later, then another. They weren't leading deeper so much as confirming that someone had already decided which direction was correct. I'd read about offerings, people leaving scraps to mark a path back out, or to appease whatever they believed lived here. Folklore made humans do that. It made them bargain with empty air. I came to a fork I didn't remember from the satellite view. 2 trails, both narrow, both swallowed by the same dense growth. The signpost between them had been cut off at the waist, no indication of which route led where. I took out my phone and tried to orient again. The GPS arrow rotated slowly, then pointed behind me. I frowned and turned in place. The arrow stayed pointed behind me, no matter how I turned. Like it wasn't tracking my direction at all, just insisting that behind was the only safe answer. I laughed once, out of frustration. The sound died fast. I forced myself to choose the left trail. Left felt less steep, more traveled. I walked for a minute, then checked my GPS again. The arrow pointed behind me. I stopped. I looked back down the way I'd come, expecting to see the fork. There was no fork behind me, just one narrow trail vanishing between trees, exactly like the one ahead. My throat tightened. I turned back toward the way I'd been walking. Same view, same dense lines of trunks, the ground rolling gently, the light dim and gray-green. I walked a little faster, telling myself it was a simple thing. Forests look the same. Your sense of direction plays tricks. You're tired from travel. But a minute later, I saw the ribbon again. The same pale strip of cloth, frayed in the same way, tied around the same sapling. I stopped so suddenly my heel slid. I reached out and touched the cloth. It was damp and warm. That was impossible. The air was cold enough that my fingers tingled. The cloth should have been cold. I pulled my hand back and felt my pulse beating too hard in my wrist. I looked around, scanning for someone nearby, for a trail prankster, for any sign of movement. Nothing. I swallowed and spoke out loud, voice low and careful. "Okay," I said to nobody. "Okay, I'm turning back." I turned around and walked, and after 10 steps, I realized something worse. The ground under my boots was different. The leaf litter thinner, the soil harder, like I'd stepped onto a trail I hadn't used before. I kept going, eyes locked ahead. And that was when I heard it for the first time. Not a voice. A hum. A single note, thin and steady, like someone singing with their mouth closed. It wasn't coming from a direction. It was coming from the forest itself, filling the space the way fog fills a low place. I stopped. The humming stopped with me. I took one step. The humming resumed. I stood very still, heart thudding, and whispered to myself, "Don't answer her." The hum softened, almost pleased. And somewhere ahead, deeper between the trees, a branch creaked, slowly, like weight shifting onto it. By the time I saw the first briar thicket, I'd convinced myself to keep moving. That's the trick of fear when you're alone. It doesn't always push you to run. Sometimes it pushes you to commit, to prove you're not afraid, to prove you're still the person who walked in. The briars weren't unusual at first glance. Thorny vines tangled around a fallen log, black stems with sharp hooks. But they were growing too cleanly, too deliberately, as if they'd been braided. And there was something caught in them. A scrap of fabric darker than the ribbons. A sleeve, maybe. The cloth was shredded along the seam, snagged by thorns. It looked old, sun-faded, but the color was still visible. A deep green, the kind of hiking jacket you'd buy at an outdoors store. I stared at it and felt the hairs on my arms lift. Because in my prep research, I'd pulled Elise Marin's missing person photo. She'd been smiling, squinting in sunlight, wearing a green jacket. I told myself that didn't mean anything. Green jackets are common. So are missing people. Still, my mouth went dry. I stepped closer. The thorns shifted, not from wind. There wasn't any wind. The vines moved with a slow, subtle tightening, like fingers flexing. I backed away. They settled again, perfectly still. I stood there, breathing shallowly, trying to decide whether my eyes had lied to me. Then I noticed the ground. A circle cleared of leaves around the thicket, about 6 feet across. The soil inside it was bare and dark, pressed down like something heavy had stood there a long time. In the center of that circle sat a small object, white against the earth. A bone, not a skull, not anything dramatic. Just a slender piece, maybe a finger bone, polished smooth. I didn't touch it. I didn't even step into the circle. I turned my recorder on again and spoke in the voice I used when I wanted to sound steady. "Coldroot Hollow has offerings," I said quietly. "Or warnings. Someone has left clothing in the briars. The vines looked disturbed." As I spoke, the humming returned. This time it wasn't a single note. It was layered like harmony, still mouth closed, still soft. It crawled over my skin. I stopped talking. The humming continued. I started talking again, forcing words out. "This is likely a local ritual site." The humming sharpened. It rose slightly in pitch like a correction. My throat tightened. I cut myself off. The humming eased. I stood there, suddenly understanding something I didn't want to. The forest didn't want narration. It wanted listening. I turned off the recorder. The moment I did, the humming faded, almost disappointed. I backed away from the briars and continued along the trail, if it was still a trail. The path had become less distinct. Leaves covered it in places, as if the woods were trying to erase it behind me. I checked my watch. Only 20 minutes had passed since the trailhead. That couldn't be right. I'd been walking longer than that. My legs felt heavier, my shoulders tense from hours of awareness. I checked again, tapping the face as if it might wake up. 21 minutes. I looked at the light filtering through the trees. It felt later than that. The gray had deepened. My phone screen came on. The time read something else entirely. An hour ahead. Then, as I watched, It blinked and shifted, dropping back to match my watch. No service, no network sync. Still, it corrected itself like a liar catching up to a story. I swallowed hard and said nothing. Not out loud, not into the recorder. I just walked. That was when I saw the footprints. Bare feet, small, as if made by a woman. They were pressed into the damp soil beside the trail. Perfect toe marks, perfect arches, and they were facing the wrong direction. They led toward me. I followed them with my eyes until they disappeared into the undergrowth. Then I felt the unmistakable sensation of being watched, close, intimate, like someone standing behind my shoulder reading over my head. I didn't turn around. I kept walking. And in the corner of my vision, between two trunks, I saw a shape that wasn't a trunk. A pale strip of something hanging, like cloth. "Don't," I whispered, barely moving my lips. The hanging pale strip swayed slightly, as if reacting to my breath, and somewhere deeper, the humming resumed, low and steady, like approval. I found the creek when the forest began to feel older. That's the only way I can describe it. The trees weren't bigger, not obviously. The trail wasn't different, but the air had that weight of deep places, like you'd stepped into a room that hadn't been opened in 100 years. The creek cut through the woods in a narrow line, water black under the canopy. The sound should have been loud, moving water over stones, but it wasn't. The current slid without chatter, like it didn't want to draw attention. On the far bank stood a simple wooden bridge. No railings, just planks laid across two logs. And on the first plank, carved into the wet wood, were letters. Not new, not fresh, but sharp. "Do not cross if you hear her." I stopped at the edge and stared. A sensible person would have turned back right then. A sensible person would have taken the carving as exactly what it was. A warning from someone who'd been in too deep. But I wasn't there to be sensible. I was there to finish something, to bring back an ending. So I listened. At first, nothing. Just the soft slide of water, my own breathing. Then faintly, that hum again. Just one note, far away, as if someone had started singing behind a closed door. I felt my stomach drop. I stepped onto the bridge anyway. The plank creaked beneath my boot. The creek didn't respond. It kept sliding under me, black and smooth. Halfway across, the humming grew clearer. It wasn't coming from behind me. It was coming from the trees on the far bank, directly ahead. My throat went tight. I wanted to run the last few steps to get off the bridge, to put solid ground under me. But something about the warning made me slow down. Like speed would be answering. Like panic was the response it wanted. I crossed calmly, stepping onto the far bank. And the moment my boot left the final plank, the humming stopped. The silence that followed was worse. I moved forward, deeper. The ground rose gradually, the underbrush thickening. A fog sat low between trunks, not rolling like real fog, but hanging in unmoving layers, as if it had been pinned. I should have been wet from it. My jacket should have darkened, droplets on my sleeves. It stayed dry. The fog wasn't touching me. It was just there, like scenery. I began to smell something faint and sweet under the rot of leaves. Not flowers, not pine, something like old perfume. It came in small waves, then vanished, then came again. Each time it returned, it felt closer. My phone vibrated in my pocket. I almost jumped. I pulled it out, expecting, what? Service? A message? Anything that belonged in reality? The screen showed a notification banner without an app name, just words, black text on a white bar. Don't talk." I stared at it, heart hammering. Then the banner slid away. No record and notifications. Nothing to prove it had existed. I stood there, frozen, and in the silence I heard a second sound, not humming. A soft, rhythmic scraping, like thorns dragged gently across bark. Slowly, calmly, the way a person might run their fingernails over wood while they waited. I turned my head, careful. A few feet off the trail, a briar vine hung from a low branch. The thorns on it were moving, not swaying in wind, not shaking. They were shifting one by one, as if the vine was being braided in real time. And behind that vine, deeper in shadow, was a pale shape, still, narrow, like someone standing just out of sight. My breath caught. I felt an urge rise in me, sudden and almost irresistible, to say something, to call out, "Hello?" To ask if someone was there, to demand a rational explanation. That urge felt foreign, like it didn't belong to me. I clenched my jaw and forced my mouth closed. The perfume smell intensified. The pale shape behind the vine leaned a fraction forward, and then very softly, so softly it was more vibration than sound, I heard a woman's voice, not speaking words, just exhaling, as if she'd leaned close to my ear. I shuddered, and I understood then, with a cold clarity that made my hands tremble, what answering her really meant. It wasn't replying to a question. It was acknowledging that she was real. I backed away from the vine without turning my back. The pale shape didn't follow, but the thorns continued their slow, patient braiding. And as I retreated down the trail, the humming returned behind me, not close, not loud, just present, like a promise that she could wait. I should have left. Instead, I made a mistake that still feels like it was placed in my hand. I stopped and checked my recorder. I wanted proof. That's what I told myself. Proof of the humming, proof of the voice, proof that I hadn't simply walked myself into panic. The recorder's red light blinked once, then went steady. I lifted it to my mouth and spoke a single sentence. "Coldroot Hollow is not quiet," I said. "It's..." The humming snapped off, like someone had thrown a switch. For a heartbeat, there was perfect silence. Then something answered. Not a voice like the woman's exhale. This was deeper, lower. The sound of a throat that wasn't meant for speech forcing itself into it. A single word, wet and careful, as if it had to remember how to form it. "Stay." I froze. My tongue went numb. The word wasn't shouted. It wasn't even spoken loudly, but it hit my chest the way deep bass does, vibrating bone. I turned the recorder off so fast my fingers slipped. The moment the red light died, the forest resumed its normal, wrong quiet. No humming. No voice. Just me, breathing too fast. I stood there, shaking, and realized something important. It wasn't that she couldn't speak. It was that she didn't need to. The forest could speak for her when it chose. I shoved the recorder back in my pocket and started walking with purpose. Back toward the creek, back toward the bridge, back toward the trailhead. I kept my mouth shut. I kept my breathing controlled. I didn't even let myself whisper. The trees didn't change. The trail didn't shift. Not at first. Then I reached the creek. Only it wasn't the creek. The water was there, yes, black under the canopy. But there was no bridge, no planks, no logs, nothing spanning it. I stared at the gap and felt my stomach hollow out. I stepped along the bank, searching left and right for any sign that I'd mistaken the spot. The ground matched my memory. The curve of water was right. The stones looked familiar. The bridge was simply gone, as if it had never existed. My phone vibrated again. Another banner. Don't cross. I swallowed hard, feeling the urge to speak clawing up my throat. Anger this time, disbelief. I forced it down. I backed away from the creek, then turned and followed the waterline, looking for a shallower spot. The forest stayed tight around me, trees pressed close. After 10 minutes, I found what looked like a ford. Stones breaking the surface, a place where the water narrowed. I stepped onto the first stone. It held. I stepped onto the second. The stone shifted slightly beneath my boot, slick with algae. I steadied myself, arms out. And then, from the woods across the creek, I heard the humming again. Close. So close it sounded like it was inside my skull. My heart pounded. I took another step. Faster now, trying to get across. The humming rose in pitch. Not louder, just higher. Like a smile. I slipped. My boot hit the water, cold shooting up my leg. I caught myself on a stone and froze, panting. And that's when I saw it. On the far bank, between two trunks, stood a woman-shaped figure. Not detailed, not clear. Just a pale suggestion of a person in the fog. She wore something that looked like a veil, hanging over where her face should have been. Her hands, if they were hands, were dark with briars, tangled around her wrists like bracelets. She didn't move. She didn't step forward. She simply existed, and the forest seemed to hold its breath with her. I stared, every rational thought burning away, replaced by the primal certainty that I was being looked at. The humming stopped. Silence. Then, very softly, like a test, the woman exhaled again, and I felt the pressure of a question without words. Are you going to answer me? My throat burned. My lips parted without permission. A single sound began to form. Not, hello? Not, who are you? Just a reflexive human response to being seen. Acknowledge. I bit the inside of my cheek hard enough to taste blood. Pain snapped me back. My mouth closed. The woman's head tilted a fraction, as if listening for the sound I'd almost made. I held still, shaking, water soaking my sock. Then, the figure receded. Not walking, not fading, but becoming a part of the fog again until there was nothing but trees. The humming returned, gentle now, and I understood with sick certainty that she hadn't stopped me from crossing. She'd simply proven she could. I crossed the creek without speaking and made it back to the original bank. My whole body felt tight, like I'd been clenching every muscle for too long. My wet boot squelched quietly with each step, a sound that seemed too loud in the muted woods. I looked for the bridge again. I looked until my eyes hurt. Nothing. So I followed the water back the way I'd come, trying to retrace my path in reverse. And slowly, the trail returned under my feet. Not all at once, but in hints. A depression in the leaves, a scuffed root, a ribbon tied to a sapling. I felt relief so sharp it almost made me lightheaded. Then I saw the notebook box, the metal container at the trailhead. I hadn't expected to see it so soon, but there it was, half hidden under a root, exactly where it had been. I stumbled forward, breath catching. I stepped into the clearing, and the moment I did, the light changed. It wasn't dramatic, no sudden darkness, no theatrical shadow, just flatter. Like the forest's depth had been painted over, like the distance between trees had been shortened. I turned in place. The trail behind me looked wrong, too narrow, too straight, like a hallway made of trees. I forced myself to focus on the box. I opened it with shaking hands. The notebook inside was dry. I flipped to the page with the warning, "Do not answer her." The words were still there. Only now there was another line beneath it, fresher, written in the same pressed, furious hand. "She will sound like you." My mouth went dry. I heard the hum again, faint at the edge of hearing. Not inside the woods behind me, inside the clearing. I didn't move. I listened. The hum was almost pleasant now, like a lullaby. And then, from somewhere just beyond my right shoulder, a voice spoke. My voice, not an imitation, not similar. My exact cadence, my exact tone, as if someone had recorded me and played it back from the air. "Hey," it said gently, like I'd called out to a friend in the dark. "You made it." My stomach lurched so hard I thought I might vomit. I kept my eyes forward. I kept my jaw clenched. The voice continued, patient. "You can talk. It's okay. I'm right here." My throat burned. Tears sprang up without warning. Not from sadness, but from the sheer pressure of holding silence while someone used my own voice to pull it open. I took a step toward the trailhead sign. The sign wasn't there. The wooden post that said Coldroot was gone. In its place stood a different post, older, darker wood, with a name carved into it. Coldroot, Widow's Walk. The voice behind me softened. "You came for a story," it said, still in my tone. "Tell it." I kept walking, forcing my boots to move, forcing myself not to run. The clearing's edge approached. Only the edge didn't lead to the parking area. It led back into trees. My pulse spiked. No, 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 no. I turned slightly, just enough to glance behind me. Between the trunks, where the trail should have been, stood the woman. Closer now. The veil over her face hung in pale strips, like torn fabric caught on thorns. Briars wrapped her arms in dark tangles, but her hands were pale, too pale, like skin that had never seen sun. She stood perfectly still, and yet the air around her felt like it was moving, like the forest itself leaned toward her. My voice spoke from her direction, calm and coaxing. "Just one word," it said. "That's all." My whole body shook. I stared at her veil and felt a sudden horrifying certainty that if I spoke, she would lift it. Not with hands, not with drama. It would simply happen the way fog parts, and whatever was under it would become part of me. I backed away, then turned and walked quickly into the trees, choosing a direction at random. The hum followed, steady, not chasing, keeping pace. Like she didn't need to run, like she knew where I was going before I did. I tried to leave Coldroot Hollow 3 different ways. Each time I arrived somewhere I'd already been. A ribbon, a briar thicket, the creek without a bridge, the clearing with the wrong signpost. The forest wasn't a maze in the normal sense. It didn't confuse you with choices. It offered you one path, and then quietly folded the ends together, like sewing, like stitching a loop. At some point, I stopped thinking in full sentences. My thoughts became blunt, animal things. Water, exit, don't speak, keep moving. The hum stayed with me, sometimes faint, sometimes close enough to vibrate my teeth. I tried to cover my ears. It didn't matter. It wasn't in the air. It was in the space between thoughts. After what I guessed was an hour, I stumbled into a patch of ground that felt different under my boots. Soft, springy, like thick moss. The trees here were tighter together, their trunks wrapped with vines. The air smelled strongly of that old perfume again, sweet and stale. In the center of the patch stood something I hadn't seen before. A small cabin. Not a modern hunting cabin. No metal roof. No windows that reflected. This was old wood, dark with age. The kind of structure that shouldn't still be standing in such wet forest. The door was shut, and nailed to it, at eye level, was a bundle of briars tied like a wreath. I knew I shouldn't go near it. I knew folklore always leads you to a door. But my legs were shaking. My boot was still wet. My hands were cold. And the cabin was the first thing that looked like shelter. I approached slowly. The hum faded. The silence that replaced it felt intentional. A pause, a held breath. As I reached for the door handle, a thin line of voice slid into my ear. Not my voice this time. A woman's whisper, hoarse as smoke. "Don't." I froze. The whisper came again. "Don't open it." My skin prickled. "Who are you?" I breathed, then stopped, horrified. I had spoken. Only a whisper. Only 2 words. But sound had left my mouth. The forest went still in response, like it had been waiting for that exact moment. Then the cabin door creaked, without me touching it. It opened a few inches, slow and careful, like someone on the other side had been holding it closed and just released. A smell spilled out. Not rot, not mold. Smoke. Old, cold smoke, like a fire that had burned out days ago. The whisper in my ear grew urgent. "Close it! Close it now!" My heart hammered. I reached to push the door shut. The moment my fingers touched the wood, I felt a vibration through it. A hum. Not the forest hum. A hum from inside the cabin, layered and close, as if dozens of mouths were closed behind the door, singing together. My stomach turned. I jerked my hand back. The door opened wider, inch by inch, patient. And in the gap, I saw something pale. Not a face. Not yet. Just the edge of fabric hanging like a veil. I stumbled backward. The whisper in my ear hissed, "Run!" I turned and ran. Branches snapped at my sleeves. Thorns caught my jacket. My wet boot slipped, almost sending me down. Behind me, the cabin hum rose in pitch, and then, cutting through everything, my own voice called out, perfectly calm. "Hey," it said. "Wait." I ran harder. The trees blurred. The ground dipped. And suddenly I was back at the creek. The same black water, the same stones, no bridge. Only now, carved into a trunk beside the bank, were words I hadn't seen before. "She got you to speak." My throat burned. I stared at that carving and felt dread settle into me like a weight. Because I knew what came next in stories like this. Not a chase. Not a jump scare. A change. Something small at first. Something you can't prove. Something you carry out of the woods without realizing it belongs to her. I don't know how long I sat by the creek. Long enough for my breathing to slow. Long enough for my shaking to stop. Long enough for my mind to start doing what minds do in crisis. Bargaining. Maybe I could still get out. Maybe speaking once didn't count. Maybe the warning meant answering her directly, replying to the voice, acknowledging the woman. Maybe a whisper didn't count as an answer. I held on to that thought like a rope. I stood up. I stepped carefully onto the stones again, forcing myself to move with control. The water was colder than before, numbing my foot through the wet boot. Halfway across, I paused and looked at the far bank. Nothing moved. No pale figure. No veil. No briars shifting. The forest was still. I took another step. The stone held. Another. I reached the far bank and stepped onto leaf litter. For the first time in what felt like hours, the hum was gone completely. I stood there listening, heart pounding. Silence. Real silence. I moved forward, picking a direction, and the trail appeared under my feet like it had been there all along. A ribbon marker, then another. The fork. The cut-off signpost. I swallowed back a sob of relief. I walked quickly, almost jogging. And then ahead through the trees, I saw the parking area. My car. The asphalt strip, the pale daylight beyond the canopy. I stumbled out of the woods and into open air. The sudden brightness made my eyes water. I stood beside my car, breathing hard, and looked back at the tree line. From this side, it looked normal. Just forest, just shadows. No doorway, no humming, no voice. I unlocked my car with trembling hands, got inside, and sat there gripping the steering wheel. For a long time, I didn't start the engine. I just listened for anything that followed me out. Nothing did. Eventually, I started the car and drove back to Marrow Glen with my jaw clenched so tight it hurt. I didn't stop at the diner. I didn't stop anywhere. I kept driving until I hit the highway, until the town disappeared in my rearview mirror. Only then did I let myself breathe. When I got home that night, I showered until the water ran cold. I checked my arms for scratches. I checked my jacket for thorns. The briars had torn threads, but no thorns remained embedded. I opened my recorder. The audio file was there, the one from the forest. I pressed play. At first, I heard only my own breathing, the soft crunch of footsteps. Then my voice, faint. Coldroot Hollow is not quiet, it's... Then a hard cut, silence. Then in that silence, a hum began. Not loud, not dramatic, just a thin, steady note. My stomach clenched, and then very softly, a voice spoke. My voice, not matching the words I'd said, not repeating them, just whispering into the mic like someone had leaned close. Stay! I dropped the recorder. It clattered onto the floor. I stared at it, pulse racing, and realized my hands were shaking again. I tried to tell myself it was a glitch, a corrupted file, a compression artifact, anything. But the word had weight. It felt like it came from a throat. And as I stood there in my quiet house, far from Coldroot Hollow, I understood what the waitress had meant. People don't come out right, because the woods doesn't always keep your body. Sometimes it keeps your voice. For 2 days after, I didn't speak unless I had to. I texted instead. I wrote notes. I let calls go to voicemail. It wasn't rational. I knew that. I wasn't afraid of answering her anymore. I'd already done that, hadn't I? What I was afraid of was hearing myself the wrong way. On the third night, I finally sat down to write the script. I told myself that was the job. That's what I'd come back with. A story. An episode. I opened a blank document and stared at the cursor blinking like a heartbeat. I typed the title. The Briar Widow of Coldroot Hollow. My fingers hovered. I started writing the opening line. I didn't go into Coldroot Hollow looking for a ghost. And then I froze, because the sentence was already on the page. Not in my font, not in my formatting, as if it had been pasted from somewhere else. My mouth went dry. I deleted it. It reappeared. I deleted it again. It reappeared again, faster, the cursor jumping as though invisible hands were typing with urgency. I slammed my laptop shut. The room was quiet. Then, from my phone on the table, a notification banner appeared. No app icon, no sound. Just words. Just one word. My throat tightened. I stared at that banner until it slid away. No record in notifications. Nothing to prove it had existed. I sat very still, heart pounding, and listened. At first, nothing. Then faintly, in the corner of the room where no speaker sat, a hum began. Thin, steady, mouth closed. The same note from the woods. My skin prickled. I stood up and backed away from the table. The hum continued, filling the quiet, the way fog fills a low place. And then, from behind me, too close, my own voice whispered, calm and coaxing. Hey, it said, you made it. I spun around. No one there. Empty hallway, dark doorway. My house unchanged, but the hum didn't stop. My voice spoke again, gentle. You can talk. It's okay. I pressed my palms to my ears. It didn't matter. The sound wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from inside the silence. Tears rose in my eyes, hot and involuntary. I clenched my jaw and forced my mouth closed, the same way I had in the forest. Minutes passed. The hum stayed, patient, pleased, like it had all the time in the world. Finally, I did the only thing I could think to do. I opened my laptop again with shaking hands. I started writing without speaking, typing fast, letting the story pour out as if I could empty it from me and be done. The words appeared, some mine, some already waiting. When I finished the draft, my throat ached like I'd been shouting, even though I hadn't made a sound. I sat back. The hum softened, almost satisfied. And then, from the speakers of my laptop, without me playing anything, my own voice whispered the last line of the episode. Sometimes it keeps your voice. I stared at the screen. The file name at the top of the document changed on its own. Not the title. The file name. It became Widow's Walk, Episode 1. Operator. My name. I didn't understand the word operator in that context. Not then, but I understood the implication. This wasn't an episode, it was a route, a channel. And I had opened it, the hum faded, the room went quiet, and in that quiet, my phone began to ring. Unknown number, no caller ID, just the vibration on the table. I stared at it, frozen. The screen lit. Instead of a number, it displayed a single line of text. Don't answer her. The warning from the notebook. The same pressed urgency. My finger hovered over decline. The phone rang again. And in the gap between rings, I heard it. A soft exhale. A woman leaning close, waiting for me to acknowledge her, waiting for me to answer. I didn't touch the phone. I let it ring until it stopped. I sat there shaking, telling myself I'd done the right thing. But the call didn't go away. The line stayed open, not on the phone, in the room, in the silence. And very softly, so softly it felt like my own breath, my voice whispered from somewhere I couldn't see. Just one word, it said. And outside my house, somewhere in the dark, I heard branches creak slowly under weight, like someone standing still, listening. I never published the episode. I told my audience there were production issues. I told myself that was smart, that if I didn't upload it, I could close the door I'd opened. But stories don't work like that. The next week, a new channel appeared with my exact naming style, my exact thumbnail aesthetic, my exact cadence in the voiceover, the same moving forest background I'd planned to use. The video title was mine, word for word, The Briar Widow of Coldroot Hollow. When I clicked it, my stomach dropped. The narration started with my voice, not a clip from my recordings, not stolen audio. My voice speaking words I had written with pauses I hadn't intended, like someone else had learned to wear it. The comments were full of people saying how real it felt, how the silence was the scariest part, how it sounded like the narrator was whispering right beside them. I watched the view count climb, a slow, steady rise, like a hum. I reported the channel. I emailed YouTube. I did everything people do when something is stolen. Nothing happened. The channel kept uploading. More folklore, more woods, more warnings. And every time, the voice was mine. The last time I checked, the newest upload wasn't even a story. It was just the moving forest background. 30 minutes of dim trees and drifting fog. No narration, no music, just silence. And buried in that silence, If you listened with headphones on, there was a thin, steady hum, mouth closed, patient. At the very end, at 29:59, my voice whispered one line, so soft you'd miss it if you weren't waiting. Stay. I don't know who is watching those videos now. I don't know what it does to people to hear that hum for half an hour and then hear my voice at the end. But I know this. Last night, my phone rang again. Unknown number, no caller ID. And when it stopped ringing, I didn't feel relief, because the quiet afterward felt occupied, like the line had stayed open, like something had found a way to route itself through my life, the way it had routed itself through the woods. I sat in the dark and held my breath, and somewhere in the silence, a woman exhaled, very softly, as if she were leaning close to my ear, waiting, not for a conversation, just for acknowledgement, just for one word. And the worst part is, I could feel my own mouth starting to move, like it remembered how, like it wanted to answer her before I could stop it.